ranking 8 different versions of Wednesday Addams. Even if you haven't watched any of the movies or TV shows that feature the peculiar Addams family, odds are you still recognize this girl. With her pale skin, pigtails, collared dress, and deadpan delivery, Wednesday Addams has become a bona fide pop culture phenomenon in the 8 decades since she was first introduced. Besides being one of the most common Halloween costumes, Wednesday's popularity has also made her a staple in Hollywood, becoming the only member of her equally odd family to get her own spin-offs. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 8 different versions of Wednesday Addams in both animation and live action. Then we'll rank them. The primary focus is going to be the character herself, so while we'll be providing background information on that specific film or TV show, we'll mostly be discussing Wednesday's role in that story and what makes that version of her unique. We'll also be talking about the character's appearance, all the way from her head down to her toes. Speaking of toes, there's nothing worse than walking around with wet ones, which brings me to today's sponsor, Vessi, an awesome sneaker company that makes comfy shoes that are 100% waterproof. Vessi's sneakers are made out of Dymatex, a dual climate knit material which keeps you cool in the summer and warm in the winter, meaning you don't have to worry about buying a new pair of shoes when the seasons change ever again. I'm actually traveling to Japan over the holidays, and as anyone who doesn't want to sell a kidney to afford additional luggage knows, sometimes you've got to stick to the basics. That's what makes my new Vessi sneakers so perfect. Besides ensuring that my feet will stay warm and dry no matter what the weather is like, they're also super lightweight, so they're ideal for all the hustle and bustle that comes with traveling. Another plus is that they're incredibly versatile, which means I can dress them up or down however I need to. If there's one thing that you should invest in, it's your feet. After all, they literally take you everywhere you need to go. So if you're still looking for that perfect pair of shoes for you or a loved one, use my code ModernGurlz or click the link in the description for 15% off your first order with Vessi. Now, let's get into it. Created by cartoonist Charles Addams, the Addams family was first introduced to the American public in an issue of The New Yorker back in 1938. Charles Addams had first made a name for himself in the industry for his macabre illustrations, often depicting his characters in creepy settings and giving them unconventional appearances and mannerisms. He brought this signature spooky style to the Addams family, which allowed them to stand out from other comics of the time like Popeye or Little Orphan Annie. In the beginning, these single-panel illustrations kept the characters separate, before eventually grouping them together. Although she wasn't given a name, the character who would eventually become Wednesday Addams was featured in these cartoons, and even back then, she was already sporting the iconic look that she would wear for the next 80 years. Because of the simplicity of these cartoons, the characters didn't have developed personalities, with their unusual behavior being nothing more than a punchline to a joke. Over a 50-year period, the Addams family appeared in 150 unrelated single-panel comics, but it wasn't until 1964 that they became household names. Based on the characters that were introduced in Charles Addams' cartoons, the Addams family first aired on September 18, 1964 on ABC. A black comedy that was a commentary on American suburban life, the show took the premise of Addams' comics and expanded upon its characters, with the series creator, David Levy, saying, quote, "We've made the family full-bodied people, not monsters. They are not grotesque and hideous manifestations. At the same time, we are protecting the images of Addams' children, as he refers to them. We are living up to the spirit of his cartoons." Besides numerous running gags, the series incorporated screwball humor and physical comedy, which gave it a lighter tone than the comics, coming across as more zany than spooky. Filmed in black and white, which wasn't really that odd back then, the set design leaned into the gothic and unusual, mirroring the family's own eccentric behavior. And this once again allowed the Addamses to visually stand out from their peers, with other sitcom families residing in homes which weren't much different from the viewers. Although many other sitcoms airing around the same time also followed unusual families, like the Flintstones, the Beverly Hillbillies, and the Munsters, what made the Addams family subversive was how close-knit and openly affectionate they were towards one another. While Pugsley and Wednesday had unconventional interests, they were happy children who enjoyed spending time with their families. Unlike other married couples on TV, Morticia and Gomez were very much in love, with Gomez doting on Morticia hand and foot instead of the other way around. The positive dynamic in their household was something that viewers found enjoyable and enviable. with Carolyn Jones, who played the matriarch of the family, saying in an interview, quote, "I think that our show is a success partly because the housewives in the audience identify with Morticia, and they identify with her because she has a husband who is still crazy about her after 10 years of marriage. He can't keep his hands off her. There's another thing, an extension of the first. The Addams family is full of love. The parents love each other, they love the children, and the children love them." Wednesday Addams is the first character we're introduced to in the series, and despite her obvious oddities, she's a sweet girl who gets along better with normal people than her parents do. Played by a 6-year-old Lisa Loring, Wednesday is undeniably adorable, and her diminutive stature serves as a visual gag against the Addams' much taller butler, Lurch, who the character is often paired up with. Although she's far less gloomy and malevolent than her comic counterpart, they have many of the same interests, with Wednesday playing with beheaded dolls and having a pet spider. When helping flesh out the characters for TV, Charles Addams wrote, quote, "Gomez and Pugsley are enthusiastic. Morticia is even in disposition, muted, witty, sometimes deadly. Wednesday is her mother's daughter." I'm not sure if I'd describe this version of Wednesday as witty or deadly, but I digress. As mentioned, Wednesday didn't have a name prior to this point, but Charles Addams was quick to come up with one for the series, taking inspiration from one of the lines from the nursery rhyme Monday's Child. Quote, "Wednesday's child is full of woe." Because the sitcom primarily focused on Gomez and Morticia, Wednesday didn't have much screen time, but she was still incredibly memorable, becoming a far more popular character than her brother Pugsley. Like many sitcoms, the Addams family didn't have an overarching plot, with each episode having the same format, just with a different conflict, meaning you could watch just about any episode in any order and it wouldn't matter because technically nothing had happened. As such, Wednesday doesn't have any character growth, but I wouldn't consider that a negative since that wasn't really the point of the show to begin with. Wednesday's appearance didn't change much from the comics, sporting the same braids, collared dress, and stockings. After only 2 seasons, the series was cancelled, but remained in the popular consciousness long afterward, something owed to the series being rerun on TV for years. On a side note, if you want a more in-depth examination of the TV show, I'd highly recommend checking out the video over on Be Kind Rewind's channel. In 1977, the majority of the cast reunited for the made-for-TV film Halloween with the new Addams family, which was shot in color, a mistake in my opinion. Lisa Loring makes a return as a now college-aged Wednesday, while Jennifer Saprinant plays 6-year-old Wednesday Jr. Now grown up, Wednesday is more cheeky than she was as a child, but still just as friendly as before, which I don't think works as well as it did in the original show. If they were going to commit to an older Wednesday, I feel as though they should have actually shown a greater change in her personality. Instead, she just winds up feeling like your average young adult. In this appearance, she wears a short navy blue dress with a rounded Peter Pan collar, which almost feels too juvenile for the character at this point in time, but it isn't terrible.
Hello, Wednesday. The dress needs letting out.
A few years before the live-action Halloween movie was released, the Addams family made their first animated appearance on an episode of Hanna-Barbera's The New Scooby-Doo Movies, which, despite its name, was a television series. The episode, titled Scooby-Doo Meets the Addams Family, or alternatively, Wednesday Goes Missing, first aired on September 23, 1972, with many members of the original show's cast providing the voices for their Scooby-Doo counterparts, aside from Wednesday, who was voiced by Cindy Henderson. In the episode, which is often considered the pilot for the eventual animated series, Mystery Inc. become housekeepers for the Addamses, watching the children while Gomez and Morticia go on vacation. While they're babysitting, Wednesday goes missing, and it's up to the gang to rescue her. This guest appearance went well enough that the following year, the first episode of their own Hanna-Barbera cartoon, The Addams Family, premiered. Unlike the original series and the comic, the family now resided in a Victorian-style RV, which they used to travel to different cities across the country where they inadvertently caused problems because of their unorthodox behavior. All of the characters in the series resembled Charles Addams' original illustrations, and while I commend their commitment to the source material, I don't think it translates very well, with Wednesday's hair looking far too simple for animation, not to mention her uncharacteristically pink dress. This feels like such a departure from the appearance she's known for that if I saw the character out of context, I'm not sure if I'd even recognize her as Wednesday Addams. In addition to this, Wednesday is also given a much sunnier disposition, having a cheerfulness and sense of optimism that's even greater than her already sweet 60s counterpart. She still has a few macabre hobbies, like voodoo dolls, but for the most part, she's more strange than she is spooky. It does make sense for her darker personality to be toned down for this version since it was made for children, but there's so many changes to the source material that I have to wonder why the Addamses were even needed for the show to begin with, besides the obvious name recognition. All of the changes made to the Addams family is likely the reason for the show's failure to strike a chord with audiences, and after only 16 episodes, it was canceled. Also, this is just a random fact that I couldn't not mention, but Jodie Foster was the voice of Pugsley. In 1991, the Addamses made their next, and perhaps most memorable, appearance. The live-action film returns to the series' macabre roots, with the characters being reminiscent of their 1960s counterparts, but with a larger emphasis on their inhuman and unsettling behavior. The first film follows the family as they reunite with who they believe to be a long-lost relative, which unbeknownst to them is actually a ruse to swindle them out of their money. Following the film's success, a sequel, Addams Family Values, was released in 1993, which I consider to be far superior. Although it plays up the comedy a bit more, it's still just as dark, if not darker, than the first movie. While the first film really only had one storyline, in the second they pushed the limits of what the audience had come to expect from the Addams family, with Morticia and Gomez welcoming a new baby, Wednesday and Pugsley being sent to summer camp, and Uncle Fester marrying a serial killer. In both films, their eccentricities frequently cause misunderstandings with normal people, something humorously juxtaposed by the fact that the Addamses think everyone else are the strange ones. Although everyone in the series is fantastic, especially Angelica Houston as Morticia and Raul Julia as Gomez, many consider Christina Ricci to be the film's greatest highlight, bringing an entirely new interpretation of Wednesday Addams to the screen. Gone is the character's sweetness. Instead, she's sadistic, sullen, and sly, speaking in a dry, deadpan manner that is incredibly disconcerting, yet still entertaining.
Where's your costume?
This is my costume. I'm a homicidal maniac. They look just like everyone else.
I'll be the victim. All your life.
Oh, Wednesday's at that very special age when a girl has only one thing on her mind. Boys.
Homicide.
Rarely smiling or showing emotion, she feels the closest to Charles Addams's original vision for the character, but even deadlier. With the character returning to her gloomy and gothic roots, it's no surprise that she regains her signature dark color palette. But with its dainty floral pattern, her dress feels properly updated for the 90s. Plus, it allows her to differentiate herself from Morticia's all-black ensemble and is more visually dynamic on screen. This Wednesday also has a few different outfits, including a Victorian bathing suit, which is a great gag that also makes sense for the character. She also wears a version of Morticia's black gown, which harkens back to Charles Addams' initial description of the character being her mother's daughter. While she and Pugsley were previously shown to have a loving relationship, in the film it's more antagonistic, with Wednesday often attempting to murder him under the guise of playing. This is also the first time when Wednesday is depicted as the older sibling. Like the rest of her family, she's at odds with the general public, but she makes no attempts to change this even when openly ridiculed for it, giving the character a level of confidence and independence that was yet unseen. Unlike other versions of the character which aired on the younger side, she was a preteen, which made her misfit characterization more relatable and realistic, and her refusal to act the way that society expected her to was something that many young girls at the time found inspiring. In many ways, this version of the character feels like an adult trapped in a kid's body, an interesting dynamic which is honestly only possible because of Christina Ricci's immense talent. This is also the first version of the character where she has a romantic interest, meeting a boy at summer camp who falls in love with her. Although they grow close and share a kiss, she's still hesitant to the idea of romance, ending the film by threatening to murder any husband she ever has. This was an incredibly different message than most kid films in the 90s, which often had their female characters end up in relationships to signify their happy ending. So, Wednesday's distaste for marriage was a breath of fresh air. Following the success of the 1991 movie, another animated Addams series was pushed into production, having a similar premise as the film where the family is disliked by the rest of the neighborhood because of their oddities. Released on September 12, 1992, the show was fairly formulaic, with each episode following the Addamses as they attempted to resolve whatever issue had arisen that week. This version of Wednesday, voiced by Debi Derryberry, is significantly darker than her other animated counterpart, having an interest in torture and the occult. Although she's somewhat vicious and vindictive, it's directed towards people who threaten her family, revealing a sweeter side to the character which wasn't obvious in the 90s movie. This version of Wednesday is cool, collected, and capable, and she's often the one who resolves the family's issues. She also uses old-timey language, which is a fun addition that I wish was incorporated into more versions of the character. In this version, she wears a blue dress, which could be an ode to the 1977 film, and she wears pink tights. This is a huge improvement from her look in the other cartoon, and even though there's a lot of color, it still feels like her. I think this would actually be a fun version of Wednesday to dress up as, because it's still recognizable but unique at the same time. Following the death of Raul Julia, who played Gomez Addams in the 1991 and 1993 films, it was decided that there would be no further installments to that series. Saban Entertainment, who owned the rights to the Addams Family for home video, decided to reboot the series in order to capitalize on the growing market. They hired Dave Payne to direct, whose prior experience was in low-budget horror films, and he wanted to take the film in a dark fantasy direction, but Saban Entertainment insisted that the story be aimed at children, rejecting any of his original ideas. As a result, all of the black comedy and satire that made the previous films popular was removed, and the film was poorly received by critics and audiences alike, with many citing the only highlight as Tim Curry. The film follows the aristocratic Addams family as they attend a family reunion, mistakenly joining the wrong families. As per usual, the Addams' odd behavior puts them at odds with everyone else, and the other attendees are frightened and disgusted by their presence. In the film, Wednesday was played by 12-year-old Nicole Fugere, whose take on the character is incredibly reminiscent of Christina Ricci's, also having a sullen demeanor and a fondness for torture. I don't think it's a bad depiction of the character, just rather derivative, and I don't think Nicole is as believable of a psycho as Christina was. Most versions of Wednesday put her in a looser-fitting shift or trapeze-style dress, but this version wore a fit and flare silhouette. I'm actually conflicted about how I feel about it. On one hand, it's so different that my gut reaction is to write it off completely, but on the other hand, there's something retro about it which feels like a good fit for the old-school Addams family. Despite the film's poor reception, Saban Entertainment went forward with a TV series, releasing The New Addams Family later that year. A revival of the 1960s TV show, the series was incredibly different from the film, and it actually received a positive response from the public and ran for 65 episodes. The New Addams Family frequently revisited storylines from the original series, but breathed new life into them by incorporating modern humor, and as a result it was familiar but still interesting. The only cast member from Addams Family Reunion to return for the show was Nicole, whose depiction of Wednesday went largely unchanged from the movie, except for a newfound annoyance at being treated like a child. Unlike the original sitcom, Pugsley and Wednesday have a prominent role, with entire episodes following their exploits. Like Christina Ricci's Wednesday, Nicole's odd behavior is highlighted through her interactions with other tweens, but unlike Christina's, she doesn't seem as self-assured, instead lashing out at anyone who treats her differently. Her outfit is very similar to what she wore in Addams Family Reunion, but with a less exaggerated skirt. Most versions of Wednesday have something that makes them unique, whether it's their personality or appearance, but the 1998 Wednesday winds up taking so much inspiration from previous depictions of the character that she becomes rather forgettable. The early 2010s was the era of web shows, as seen with the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, and in 2013, Wednesday Addams made her YouTube debut in Adult Wednesday Addams. Written by and starring Melissa Hunter, the series followed a 20-something Wednesday after she moves to Los Angeles, with each episode revolving around the character experiencing some facet of 21st century life and responding to it in her signature psycho style. A time capsule of that specific era in pop culture, the show reminds me of other online sketches from BuzzFeed and College Humor with a tiny dash of SNL, and it winds up feeling more like a parody of the character than what she'd actually be like as an adult. I'm not saying that the series isn't enjoyable, it's just obvious. In the series, Wednesday is a hero of sorts, with the character reacting to certain situations, like being catcalled, in a way that many of us wish we were able to. Although in retrospect, the girl boss feminism can sometimes be a bit over the top. With no filter or social etiquette, Wednesday continues with the monotone delivery introduced by Christina Ricci, but it's more quick on the draw. She's dressed in a straightforward interpretation of what Wednesday would wear if she were an adult, with the character donning a black bodycon dress and heels. Despite its popularity, only 13 episodes were produced due to a copyright issue. While we'd seen the Addams in a cartoon format on 2 other occasions, 2019's The Addams Family marked the first time they were computer animated, being a near-exact copy of Charles Addams' illustrations. Unlike some of the other Addams projects, this one gives the family a backstory, showing how Gomez and Morticia were forced to move into their home after an angry mob chased them out of their last one. Years later, they find themselves struggling to maintain this isolation, with Wednesday expressing a desire to experience the outside world, which Morticia disapproves of. Wednesday is eventually able to convince her mother to let her go to school, where she befriends a few other girls after defending them from the school bully. Influenced by her newfound friendships, she begins to dress more colorfully, much to her family's chagrin. Meanwhile, a member of the town has been plotting against the Addamses in the hopes of kicking them out, but people are eventually able to see that they aren't monsters, just a family like any other.
If they're freaks, then I'm a freak, and so are all of you.
In 2021, they released a sequel, which had similar themes about the importance of family. In the film, the Addams set out on a road trip across the country, and Wednesday finds herself clashing with her parents, something exacerbated by the reveal that she might not be their biological child. She later runs away with the man who claims to be her real father, who in actuality is only hoping to use Wednesday's scientific know-how for his benefit. He captures her family to experiment on them, but Wednesday refuses, and a battle ensues. The film eventually ends with her reuniting with her family. Like the vast majority of animated films nowadays, they cast well-known actors as the Addamses in the hopes that their star power would automatically serve as a form of advertising, and Chloe Grace Moretz was the voice of Wednesday. Chloe actually speaks in a rather monotone manner to begin with, but she adds certain flourishes to Wednesday's voice that allow it to be unique from others before it, and I actually think it's some of Chloe's best work. What's interesting about this series is that despite being advertised as a story about the Addams family, Wednesday feels like the main character, especially in the second film. Unlike other versions of the character, she has reasons for her actions, like the desire to make friends or feeling out of place amongst her family. And with the character having obvious growth over the course of the story, she feels like the most developed iteration of Wednesday thus far. Like most versions of Wednesday at this point, the character's personality is heavily influenced by Christina Ricci's somber portrayal, but I find her to be a lot more theatrical and funny. Instead of being a sadistic psycho, this version of Wednesday is a mad scientist, with her oddball behavior stemming from a place of curiosity instead of chaos. She can also read minds, which makes her the first version of Wednesday to have supernatural abilities. I also like that this version of Wednesday is able to make friends with normal people, while still being a nonconformist. By having her stand up against bullies, it makes the character more empathetic.
I'm not locked up in here with you, Bethany. You're locked up in here with me.
While the 90s Wednesday rebelled against societal expectations for young women, this version is a more accurate depiction of tweendom, with the character pushing back against her family's expectations of her. Since she already acts and dresses in a manner that would be considered rebellious to the general public, in order to shock her family, she has to wear pink and enter a beauty pageant, revealing how this film has a greater understanding of the Addams' dynamic than most. While many other versions of Wednesday Addams have made her look visually dissimilar from her peers via her appearance, this film fully commits to the idea, with Wednesday being so pale that she actually looks like a dead person come to life, and as a result, when people are initially turned off and scared of her, it makes sense. While her look is mostly the same as the original illustrations, the first film makes a clever addition by tying her braids into nooses. Unfortunately, this creative design choice is removed in the sequel, with the character now having what looks like Chinese finger traps in her hair. Before we get into 2022's Wednesday, I just want to say that this is not a review of the show. So if that's what you were expecting, you're going to be sorely disappointed. But there will be spoilers, so you've been warned. Premiering in November 2022, the Wednesday series was executive produced by Tim Burton, who had previously been tied to two other Addams Family-related projects, the 1991 film, which he passed on, and a cancelled stop-motion animated film that was set to come out in the 2010s. As the name suggests, the series' main character is Wednesday Addams, who is now a teenage sleuth in the vein of Nancy Drew. The series begins with Wednesday being expelled from her high school after punishing some boys who had been bullying her brother Pugsley. This is one of her multiple expulsions, and as a last resort, her parents enroll her at Nevermore Academy, a school for monstrous outcasts that they themselves had once attended. Wednesday finds herself at odds with the rest of her schoolmates, often as a direct result of her emotionless, callous, and defiant personality. She discovers that she has psychic abilities, which she attempts to use to solve a murder, but in doing so, she also uncovers secrets about her family's past. Just to get this out of the way first, Jenna Ortega does an absolutely phenomenal job as Wednesday Addams, which is unsurprising if you've seen her other work. While there are many similarities between her Wednesday and others, there's more nuance to the character than ever before, and her evolution over the course of the series is incredibly heartwarming. Like other Wednesdays, she's a rebel, in part against authority, but also against her family's expectations, and it's interesting to see the series attempt to tackle the root of this issue in a clinical way with the character going to therapy. In the past, the character's odd behavior has solely been expressed through her monotone way of speaking and her dark humor, but the show takes it a step further by also making her awkward, with Wednesday having difficulties expressing herself and struggling in social situations. Like most contemporary depictions of Wednesday Addams, she's immediately treated as an outcast by her peers, but I personally find it less believable than most. That isn't to say that this version of Wednesday is less weird than any other, but in a school filled with werewolves, sirens, shapeshifters, and gorgons, I don't think that they would find her odd right off the bat. However, this is somewhat remedied by people growing to dislike her specifically because of her actions. Besides her superiority complex, which causes her to frequently belittle others, Wednesday also pushes people's buttons and ignores their clearly expressed boundaries. But instead of depicting this as a case of the Addamses being normal and everyone else being strange, the show criticizes her behavior, and Wednesday winds up apologizing for the way she's hurt others and learns from these experiences. Although she begins the series as a friendless pariah, she's eventually able to find a group of people who she cares about, and even though it doesn't come naturally to her, she does her best to show them that she cares. A problem I did wind up having with the show is Wednesday's many love interests. She begins the series by stating that she's completely uninterested in getting married and starting a family, a sentiment which was shared by Christina Ricci's Wednesday. But because of what happens in the series, it winds up feeling like something she says just to upset her parents. Back in the 90s, this was a rather subversive idea, but nowadays it's becoming more and more common for people to have this viewpoint. The problem with this series is that they introduce the idea that Wednesday is completely uninterested in romance, only to backtrack by having her enter a love triangle. Besides love triangles being an incredibly played out trope in young adult series, I wish that it was made obvious that Wednesday wasn't actually interested in anyone. Unless it was Enid, because that's the relationship that actually feels the most developed. This version of Wednesday Addams has the most outfits by far, and I love all the ways that they experimented with her look. She of course sports the classic collared dress, but with a skirt that seems inspired by the new Addams Family, and a floral pattern that takes notes from the 1991 Addams Family movie. The dress doesn't make many appearances in the series, but I love that they had her wear it at least once. And the strong shoulders are a great update for the 2020s. Over the course of the series, she wears various black and white outfits, and while this could have been boring, it isn't, something owed to their experimentation with loud patterns. Overall, Wednesday dresses more punk than she had in the past, with the character stomping around in chunky combat boots and frequently wearing leather. It fits the edgier direction of the series, while also referencing the fact that people in alternative subcultures often gravitated towards them because they didn't fit in with the rest of society. Wednesday wears a uniform in many of her scenes at Nevermore, and I love how they made small changes to it to better fit Wednesday's personality and aesthetic. This series will no doubt inspire more creative takes on Wednesday Addams next Halloween, and I've already begun seeing really fun recreations of her looks online. The series also marks the first time that Wednesday is depicted by a Latina actress, a choice that I actually think makes a lot of sense when you consider her father is named Gomez and has been played by a Latino actor in the past. women of color aren't usually allowed to be subversive and alternative without also being the villain, so I think this is a great step in the right direction when it comes to representation. If you happen to be wondering what my thoughts are on the series as a whole, I didn't love it. The story was a little too CW drama for my tastes, and I also thought it was missing one of the most important aspects of the Addams family, which is how their oddness is often a commentary on contemporary society. Now that we've gone through these different versions of Wednesday Addams, it's time to rank them, starting with the worst and ending with the best. As always, this is my opinion, so don't freak out if my favorite isn't yours. Cindy Henderson. This version of the character is just disappointing. Besides being way too cheerful and smiley, I just can't get over the pink dress. Nicole Fugere. Even though she's a huge improvement from the animated version, I still find this Wednesday to be rather uninteresting. She at least has the character's sullen demeanor and macabre interests, which is a plus, but there's nothing that makes her unique, and it's quite obvious that she's just a copy of other versions. Melissa Hunter. Although the premise of the series is great, it's the scenarios which are interesting, not Wednesday herself. But this could also be my distaste for this type of humor talking. Lisa Loring. Look, she's the original and she will always have my respect for that, but in retrospect, she doesn't really feel like Wednesday. The only thing that makes it work is that Lisa Loring's cuteness is such a stark contrast to everything else that's happening. But I'll also cut them some slack since this was the first version of the character to be translated into a different medium. Debi Derryberry. Trust me, I'm just as surprised as you are. Even though she's obviously influenced by the 90s movie, this version of Wednesday is still able to stand on her own with her eerily calm demeanor. Chloe Grace Moretz. I didn't have high expectations for this version of Wednesday, but it really surprised me. She's one of the most developed versions of the character, and I really like the exploration of their family dynamic. I just wish they'd kept her hair in nooses in both movies. Jenna Ortega. Wednesday Addams had been done to death by the time 2022 rolled around, so it's a huge testament to Jenna Ortega's abilities that she was able to create a version of the character that was uniquely her own, while still feeling like the Wednesday we know and love. It's definitely the version of the character who feels the most like a real person, even if the setting is totally fictional. I also love her outfits, especially her ball gown. Christina Ricci. I know, I can already see the comments that are going to call this choice predictable, but hear me out. While this Wednesday may not have the character development of her more recent counterparts, she's undeniably the most influential, not only inspiring an entire generation of young women, but also determining the direction of every single version of Wednesday since. Without this dark and deadly Wednesday who openly rebelled against society, the character would still be a sweet little girl who played with headless dolls. Which version of Wednesday Addams is your favorite? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!